Welcome to The Coach is In, the podcast for parent leaders who are juggling work, family, and life, and wondering if there's actually a way to do it all without falling apart. I'm Kat, a coach, lawyer, and mom who's been there, navigating the tightrope of leadership at home and work, and figuring out what's actually worth the energy.
And I'm Irene, a leadership coach on a mission to bridge generational gaps and bring fresh perspectives to the challenges parent leaders face. If you're skeptical that balance, calm, or boundaries are even possible, we get it. We're not here for quick fixes or empty advice. We're here to have honest conversations, share practical tools, and maybe even help you see things differently. Because the coach is in, and this space is for you. Okay, let's talk about something that every parent deals with: decisions. And it's not just the big life altering decisions. I'm talking about the hundreds of tiny ones we make every single day: what to make for dinner, which shoes the kids should wear, whether we should sign them up for yet another activity. It's exhausting.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Irene, yes, decision fatigue. And we don't even realize how much energy we're really spending on these little decisions. I remember it literally was about 20 years ago, but there's a book called The Paradox of Choice by Barry Schwartz. And I have it on my bookshelf. And now, by now, it's old enough where I think it's been reissued and he's got a number of books afterwards. But I remember reading it and thinking, it blew my mind. This was my problem. And in my family life, I often see how I want to give my kids choice, or they think they need more choices because we equate that with freedom or abundance. But sometimes it can just make things harder and create some anxiety. And so navigating this balance can be difficult.
Ooh, I've definitely heard of that book. I have not read it, but I'm gonna add that to my reading list. One thing that makes me think of is, you talked about decision fatigue. Have you heard of the terminology analysis paralysis? What is
Yes, yes,
there you
exactly. You can get stuck in that. Hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah, I totally hear you when you say like, oh, you can feel guilty that you might feel like you're not giving your kids enough choices, but where do you strike the balance between giving them enough choices and not giving them enough choices?
I think first we have to normalize the idea of fewer choices being okay. So if you're someone that fully embraces this idea of more choice is always better, then it's going to be hard for you to free yourself from some of these situations that cause decision-making fatigue and can lead to analysis paralysis. And there's actually something called decidophobia that is, extreme anxiety and worry that results from an inability to make decisions. So as we really think about, I guess, whether or not it makes sense to limit ourselves, reflect on how do decisions make you feel, right? So, you know, in certain circumstances, like maybe when a kid's coloring, this is just a very simplistic example, but you might want that whole box of 64 crayons. It free expression, etc. Sky's the limit. But in other circumstances, like they're getting ready in the morning, sometimes it can be helpful if they only have two clean pairs of pants because they can only choose between two. I remember doing this when my girls were little. Like instead of asking them, what do you want to wear today? Which could then lead to hours or certainly dozens of minutes spent on them trying to decide between outfit A, outfit B, these pants, this top, etc., giving them two options like the purple pants or the pink pants and presenting it to them as the choice, it eliminated so much decision making time and frustration for them because it when you only have a limited number of choices, sometimes it's more obvious which one you should choose.
Mm. Oh my gosh, there's so many things that came up for me as you with what you just shared. But so I guess what I'm hearing you say is that when you have too many choices, what exactly is the goal here, right? Because like, for me, coming from a management engineering background, optimization is a big thing for us. Like you have to minimize time, minimize costs, maximize revenue. But that doesn't always have to be the case. And what it sounds like what you're talking about is you can make decisions more fun and less stressful. And if the goal here is to have fun, then maybe less choices would, what do you call this? There is no right choice that would get you to the goal of having fun.
Hmm. I like how you're tying it back to essentially this sense of value, right? Or like, what is the priority here? What are you trying to come away with? So, yes, like you can make decision making fun and make limiting choices kind of feel fun. Because I think when people think of limitation or restriction, there's this potential feeling of loss. Like, why would I only want to choose from two things when I could choose from 102 things? But it doesn't have to be that way. You can reframe that, the limited spectrum, by, like you said, choosing to prioritize perhaps the spontaneity of it or the fun of it. So if you are, for instance, with your kids and you're trying to decide where to eat, it I don't know about you, but I know that sometimes it's like, we could go here. What about this? How about here? And then suddenly, 20 minutes later, you still haven't decided on a place to eat. Or maybe you're surfing Netflix or Amazon and you're trying to figure out a show to watch. And all of a sudden, 30 minutes later, you still haven't decided. So, some of the ways that can make it fun and can eliminate this sense of fatigue and the weight of deciding is pick at random. I've heard of people who will put a map on the wall when they're trying to decide where to go for vacation. And it might be a map of the US, it might be a map of their state, limiting to some extent where the randomness occurs. And then going with wherever that dart lands. Throw a dart at the map, it lands on Madison, Wisconsin. Then you have fun coming up with all the ways you can discover and explore Madison, Wisconsin. So that's one way. I know that for me, sometimes delegating a decision about dinner can make it kind of fun for me and fun for my kid. Like, I don't want to have to decide between spaghetti carbonara or pesto or spaghetti and meatballs. So you pick. And maybe they have a really strong opinion about it and they choose, and then, I go with it. I know that flipping a coin, some people do that where they'll narrow things down to two options and then just flip a coin. And then let the fates have it. That's another way that you can reduce your decision fatigue and keep it lighthearted, not making it feel like it's somehow a burden.
Mm. As you're mentioning that, one element that came up for me was the element of time, because when you're coming from a place of scarcity, it feels like the decision that you make, you're kind of stuck with it. But in reality, you do have time to explore these options. And maybe you pick this one now, but then you pick the other
Mhm.
choice at some point later.
Mm, yes, yes, that's another great suggestion is, you know, uh, if there's four things that your family wants to do, instead of having to choose, maybe you schedule them out or plot them out so that there's some that are done later and there are some that are done first. And that way you maybe don't have to decide, or the decision is more about timing and it's a when versus a if. So yeah, that's a really, really good point.
Mm. So, for the parents
Mhm.
listening, what's one thing they can start doing today to take some of the stress out of decision making?
I think one of the ways that, or one of the things that really helps me is to get clear on your values, right? Because you may have heard, at least within the business context, you can have good, fast, or cheap. You can get two out of three, but you can't have all three at once. So it forces you to acknowledge that you have to prioritize certain things. And similarly, I think if you can kind of come up with or identify your most important values, that can help you in a pinch determine like which one here is really better. So for instance, my husband and I will go grocery shopping and sometimes we don't he might have seen a commercial about this pasta sauce and I might have heard something about this one, or how do we decide? It might come down to price. Like that is our tie-breaking value is price. It might be which is organic. Are there preservatives in it? Is it local? Deciding in advance if there are certain values that rise to the top for you, remembering those and bringing them up if you're in a situation that feels kind of wishy-washy or you're just caught up in indecision. Knowing those values and revisiting those and letting that be the tiebreaker can be helpful. Another thing that I really love, and this relates to kind of perfectionism, is this idea of letting go of what something is supposed to look like and being okay with mostly fine, good enough. There's a book, there was a senator, his name is Ben Sass. I forget the name of his book, but I remember this from it, which is the mostly fine decision, the MFD. There are going to be situations in life where you just have to walk away knowing that it was an MFD. It was a mostly fine decision. Say you're at a ice cream shop and there's 31 flavors and you're hemming and hawing about which one to go with. Pick a default or decide on what flavor you're going to eat and then accept the fact that mostly fine is good enough. Because I think that can lead us to over researching, over analyzing, like the analysis paralysis you mentioned, and thinking that there is a perfect outcome, that there is one right thing, when in fact, perhaps all of our decisions are mostly fine decisions where we're going to be okay. We'll learn from a situation, even if it may not go exactly the way we expect it to. And ultimately, it's a mostly fine thing. So embrace the MFD. So I think those two things, if parents can get clear on their values and understand these tiebreakers and knowing that not everything needs to be micro analyzed and understanding the relationship of perfectionism in decision making and leaning into the mostly fine decision. Those are two different angles of how we can start to let go of the stress of decision making.
I love that because what you remind me of is like I feel like we're bringing our professional selves into the small decisions that wouldn't really move the needle for us. So it's like, oh, the hyper achieving mom who's in the office is also the same person making these decisions, but it doesn't have to be. Like we can relieve ourselves of that pressure because these small decisions wouldn't really move the needle for us or would change one way or another. One thing that I am curious to know of, Kat, because you mentioned delegating decisions, and I know you have
Mm.
two teen daughters, is
Mhm.
um, how has it been like for you to also delegate these decisions to them?
Mm. It, well, as someone that struggles with perfectionism and likes to manage and control things because I have this tendency to think that I will make sure it gets done, quote unquote, right. It wasn't easy initially, but I will say, and I think most of us who've tried, are engaging in the practice of overcoming perfectionism know this to be true, that it does get easier, or you start to realize the fallacy of you the idea of perfect and the idea that you are the only person that can do something right. So, of course, there is a learning curve. And as I've delegated things to my daughters, like for instance, when they were little, I was able to fold their laundry and make sure it got put in their drawers a certain way so it was easy for me to find when they needed it or easy for them to find when they needed it. And now that they do their own laundry, I have to be okay with it not being folded the way I want it to be folded. But I also remember what's the goal here? What's the priority here? And similar to kind of what's really important and the idea of taking the stress out of decision making. If the goal is they're able to find what they need and that's getting met, then how it gets met, I can let go of it. So that for me, understanding what's the ultimate goal here is key so that I'm clear on whether, you know, that's mostly being attained. Another thing that helps with delegating and overcoming that fear of delegation is remembering how it's benefiting them. Like when it comes to parents and kids, there is no joy in and like thinking long term in raising a kid that cannot be independent and isn't capable of taking care of themselves on their own. So are these life skills that I know that they will need to have in order to navigate life on their own with success and feel capable when I'm not around. And if this ties into that and supporting that, then it allows me, it gives me permission to delegate, not just because it's something that I may not want to do, but because it's something that I know is going to benefit them in the long run. So that's something that often is a refrain in my mind when I'm thinking about delegation and the big picture of things. And it's not always about me, and it's not always about me needing control or whatnot. A lot of times this needs to happen because you need to learn how to do this for yourself. You are of a certain age where this is okay, something that you can learn, and this will be helpful for you to feel independent and capable and thrive in life on your own.
I love that. Thank you for sharing because so what this reminds me of is that family is a team. And while it may seem like parents and children might be on different sides of the fences, you really are really working towards the same goal. And on top of that, you are also nurturing your kids to become independent, to be able to make their own decisions while achieving the goals that you have as a family.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the delegation doesn't have to be a wholesale like, okay, tomorrow you're making dinner. It can be like even with their laundry as that example. Like I think it started with us folding together and then us putting clothes away together. And then maybe I did the folding with them and then let them put them away on their own. And then suddenly it became they do everything on their own. So it can be in small steps and gradually. Like it doesn't have to feel so hard for you or for them if the delegation is kind of broken down into smaller phases so that it's not overwhelming to them and it's not, super sudden for you as a parent where you're wondering and perhaps anxious because you've taken all these micro steps and seen their successes along the way to know that, okay, full delegation, because I've seen you go through A, B, C, D, E, is not a big deal. Like I know that you're capable and you're kind of going to succeed in this.
I love that. So, just to recap, there's so much goodness that we've covered today. So, the first thing that I wanted to take away from our conversation tonight is that not every choice needs to be a deep thought. Identify low stakes decisions and simplify them. The second would be to reduce choices because in doing so, it could be fun. So, using tricks like picking things at random or delegating. And the third one would be mostly fine decisions are fine. We let go of perfectionism in everyday choices. And as you just shared, you can start small because you don't have to overhaul everything at once. Just experiment with simplifying one area and see how it feels. So, before we wrap up tonight's session, what is one thing you would like to share to parents who might be listening tonight?
It's a slight tweak on a quote that I've shared in a previous episode, but remember that the goal is progress, not perfection. And I think when we embrace that, we understand that mostly fine truly is fine. So just think of how all of this in the grand scheme of things is helping you make progress as a person.
I love that. Well, there you have it, folks.
Thanks for listening to The Coach is In. If something from today's episode made you stop and think or even roll your eyes, don't worry, that's part of the process. If you're curious to hear more, hit follow, leave a review, or share this episode with someone who gets it. Remember, we're not promising perfect answers, but every small shift can make a big difference. Until next time, take care of yourself. The coach is in, and this space is for you.